Welcome to Spectrum Perspectives, real talk with parents, professionals, and autism advocates, with your host, Cindy Gellermini.
Hi, everybody. This is Cindy with another episode of Spectrum Perspectives. And today I have a special guest with me. His name is Nate Diskint, and he is the brother of someone with special needs, not necessarily autism, but he runs a really amazing program. That's why I have him on today. I want him to tell us, what he's doing to help adults with special needs. Hi, Nate. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Cindy. Happy to be here.
So I'm going to start the interview the way I do with everybody and just sort of back up a little bit. And I'd like you to tell us a little bit about your brother and your relationship with him. What is his specific diagnosis? He has Down syndrome, correct?
That's right.
Okay. So is he older than you or younger?
He's younger, about 4.5 years younger. He's 27 right now.
Okay. So, and did you grow up in New Jersey?
We did. Yeah. Just in Chatham, New Jersey.
Oh, okay. Oh, you're right up the hill from me. So,
Yep.
So tell me a little bit about growing up with him. Did he go to the same school as you? Did he go to a special school?
So to start, my parents were a little alternative. So we went to a Montessori school and he was there with us. And then he was the first individual with Down syndrome to be mainstreamed in our school district. Much to the credit of my parents, who had to fight tooth and nail for him to be included. Chatham is also home to ECLC, which is a special needs school. And the modus operandus for the district is anyone with disabilities goes to the school for people with disabilities. But of course, right, the IDEA Act provides accommodation for people with disabilities to access the least restrictive educational environment. So my parents got him into the schools with us, which was not easy. But yeah, it was really great. So,
Tell me a little bit about that, the IDEA Act. What is that?
So what's that stand for? I'd have to get back to you on what that stands for, but it was passed in 79 through 81. And that's the provision, the federal provision that
So it's federal. This is not a state. This is federal.
Right, and that's
Okay.
what pushed mainstreaming in school districts, and so that's why today we see so many individuals coming out of a mainstreamed educational experience where, right, we say they're entitled to the least restrictive educational environment possible to support their needs.
Okay, so that's interesting because that's a good background to know, because that has a lot to do with what you're doing now, actually, with your brother.
Yeah, exactly.
So he was in your school when he was mainstreamed?
So, he's a little bit younger than me, but he did come through the same. So we all had, I have an older brother as well, and we all got to have, some similar experiences.
Got it.
But inclusion, it doesn't come naturally now. It didn't come naturally then.
Mhm.
There were moments, I remember my parents being extremely frustrated, many meetings with superintendents and the principals and teachers and aides. There was one instance that stands out where this must have been in his elementary school, where the aide would consistently sit between him and the other students when they sat in like a semicircle. So he would be on the tail end, and in photographs that was the same, and like the school photo with the class, it's the class sitting there together, then the support person, and then Jeremy. What's that about?
Yeah. One of my next questions was, did he have an aide? So did he have an aide throughout?
Depending on the class, he would have different levels of support. So sometimes he would have an aide, and I actually can't speak to it so much, and my parents were really the champions of that. I was just aware that he was in school, and it was challenging.
Right. How was your relationship with him? Did you kind of take care of him, or you just kind of did your own thing?
So we actually shared a room growing up. So we had bunk beds and then side-by-side twins, and I wasn't aware of his disability for a while. So I think that really helped. And I mean, helped and hurt, confusion over, what's this difference? And he has very low support needs. So what, others might call, high functioning.
Mhm.
And he's very aware of having a disability himself. but yeah, we were always super close, hanging out, doing things.
Mhm.
And we have an older brother as well. All of us grew up, really close.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, that's nice. What about your friends? How did they relate to him? What I'm just curious. The reason I ask these questions is because my daughters were 4 years older than my son, and then I have my fourth child was 4 years younger than Robbie, and they had very different relationships. The older siblings kind of cared for him, but the younger one, it was completely different.
Hmm. Yeah. Look, I think out of necessity, as I got older, maybe I took on a little bit of a caretaking role.
Mhm.
But when we were kids, we were just kids together.
Mhm.
Um, and I remember being frustrated when we go out in public. Sometimes some of my friends and others wouldn't necessarily be able to understand him
Right.
early on. He had a few like speech impediments to start that he's overcome now. Um, but having to almost like translate for him and being frustrated, like not knowing why they can't understand what he's saying. But yeah, my friends were pretty open-minded, and so not only were they open with him, but there were other folks with disabilities in our school. And I remember we had a young woman who has autism join our lunch table, and yeah, we were all a big group of friends.
Hmm. Hmm. That's nice. Yeah, because I'm always concerned about kids getting bullied in school. And that's why, but I think if there's a sibling there, that probably helps.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look, I don't know, have a stern talking to. I don't know if that's the way I would put it then. Maybe get to fisticuffs with someone now and
Mhm.
again over a comment or something I heard, or,
Right,
make a confrontation.
right,
But that's no different than what my older brother did for me when I was coming up and, following him, and,
right,
got myself into trouble and he has to come bail me out. So
right.
we passed that along.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, so some of the interviews I'm going to be doing after you are going to be with financial planners and attorneys, special needs attorneys and things about planning for your child's future. So, when they turn 18, declaring guardianship and stuff. And part of that has to do with so that all the responsibility doesn't fall on the siblings. But they would probably name you as a guardian to make decisions after the parents are not here. So I'm just curious, you're not the parent. I'm just curious if you know anything about what they had set up for him. Did he go to school till he was 21 or 18?
Yeah, exactly. 21.
Okay. Okay.
Um, so yeah, I guess I can't speak totally to that, but our older brother, James, he runs the IHSS law office of James Diskint. So in-home supportive services. So he's an attorney specializing in disability law.
Hmm.
So right, my background was totally different. I studied bio and mechanical engineering, and now I run Co-Home. So all of us kind of together came into the disability space.
Right.
Um, yeah, I know he's been very useful
Yeah.
with some of those conversations toward, future planning. And my
Right.
mom has taken a very proactive role in making sure everything's, set up and tidy.
Right. Good. Okay. So let's talk about Co-Home, which is very interesting. I'm going to let you just tell me all about it. Tell me about the inception, how you came up with the idea and how it all came about.
So when Jeremy aged out of his district-based supports, he started self-advocating, and my mom as well, hey, you're an adult, what are you going to do? And Jeremy himself, he's like, well, I want to go do what Nate and James did. They went away to college, they lived with friends, they moved to other cities. I want to do the same. And that triggers this really interesting conversation of, wait a second, you have Down syndrome.
Mhm.
What can we reasonably expect to be possible? And so I wasn't part of this aspect of it, but then my mother with Jeremy went around to a number of different group home providers around New Jersey, and she'd call me crying afterwards. And it was very upsetting to learn about the lack of options, and the fact that those options were what I now call segregated settings. So settings where only individuals with disabilities live together, and that there's this presumption that people with disabilities belong living with other people with disabilities and not included in the rest of society. So what happened, I mean, my mother, being, big champion of Jeremy, actually set up like a private apartment. She rented an apartment in Morristown for Jeremy, and a friend, who did not have disabilities, to live together. And to, so both of them, I think Jeremy was going to CCM at the time, getting a certificate in culinary arts. The friend was working, so they both had their lives. They lived together. Jeremy would have supports come in, and it was great, except it was all on my mom.
Mhm.
And so I had this idea, well, there are a lot of organizations out there that do housing. They specialize in housing. There's funding available for housing. Jeremy qualifies as low income. What can we do to help set him up in a sustainable situation where also it's not just him and one other person, where there's more of a community for him to participate in? And so I had partnered with a large national nonprofit. We set up a home in Morristown together. And the goal was for it to be, the first inclusive, co-living environment for individuals who are neurodiverse. Probably within 6 months, it took a severe turn into a group home. A hammer sees nails, and an organization set up to operate group homes, operates group homes. So I quit my job, came down to Morristown, worked with my older brother and my family, and we looked at a dozen homes. We did some community building events, and we founded Co-Home. So in 2017, we created Co-Home, which, let's see if I can remember our mission statement. Co-Home creates inclusive homes for people who experience disabilities and their peers to live together as housemates. So we now operate 3 properties in Morristown, where we have housemates who are neurodiverse. So that's folks with and without disabilities, and folks all across the spectrum living together in their communities, in a very, what we would call, beautifully normal environment. It's very special, but what makes it special is that it's normal.
Mhm. Yeah, I visited the one that I went to visit. Was that the first one?
Yeah, that's our big flagship one.
Yeah. So that's sort of like a big, just for people obviously that can't see what it is. It's kind of a big Victorian type of a home with a wraparound porch. How many bedrooms are in there? It's like 4 or 5?
9.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's 6,200 square feet.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, and your brother actually lived there, and
Yeah, he still lives there. He still lives there now.
okay. Yes. And as you said, it's, people with disabilities and not with disabilities that all live there as well. Which is really interesting. And I remember you telling me about, they can walk downtown. For people not from New Jersey, Morristown is, it's more, it's kind of like a city, it has a whole downtown with lots of stores and restaurants and all that kind of thing. You can walk to all these stores, but yet it's also a beautiful residential place also. So,
Right, so all
just
of our
walking
properties
distance
are within easy walking distance of town. That's super
Right.
important to us, right? Because we don't want to depend on paratransit for everything, right?
Right.
So they can walk to get groceries, and walk to the movie theater, walk to grab a coffee with a friend or an ice cream.
Right.
We do activities in the community all the time. So having that immediate access is really important.
Mhm. Now, what about if somebody does need supports? Who helps them?
Yeah, so residents kind of bring their own supports with us. We have a self-directed model of supports where, the individual and their circle of supports are in charge of, I guess there's some autonomy in their support. So we help them get set up with supportive services to meet their support needs. So whether that's activities of daily living, someone maybe needing 40 hours of support, someone needing 5 hours of support, someone needing one-to-one in the kitchen, someone, it's all different.
Sure, because
So
everybody's different. Yeah.
right. So we don't do a top-down imposed staffing model where we say, hey, we're going to have a house manager there, and they're going to provide the supports to everyone who's there at that time. We think that that's maybe a little archaic, right? we might have one person who wants to go do one thing, one person who wants to do another, and we're not going to make them all compromise because you couldn't get me to do that. So.
Right. Right. Yeah. And so in my head now, I'm comparing it to the group home where my son was. Now, my son had very high support needs. He needed help with everything. He needed, you had to bathe him, help him in the bathroom, brush his teeth for him, cut his food for him. He still wore a diaper. I mean, he needed all kinds of care, compared to your brother, who was able to go to what culinary school, you said. So I would never let my son handle a knife, but so that's very different. And so parents would have to decide what's appropriate for their loved one, I guess.
Yeah, and I
right?
think approaching it very carefully to understand, first off, going into housing, knowing what the support needs are. So we actually run a program called the experiential assessment, where we'll work with the person one-to-one to learn in real time, through real experiences, what their support needs are, before we have a conversation about residential. And that's to give a better picture of what settings may be appropriate to meet their support needs in the least restrictive environment. Through our experience, there's a lot of support needs that can be met in a very independent way, as long as one's very intentional about setting it up with, if someone has a much higher, simply higher support needs, having redundancies built in there, making sure there's a sufficient budget, correct tier assignment in New Jersey, right, and budget to accompany through Medicaid and the rest of it.
Right. Yes. And yeah, that's so. The interview that I did with Michelle from Our House, she had mentioned that the tiers, and the higher the support needs, the more money they get from the state, right? With Medicaid, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So doing we do basically a reconciliation where, the state does a paper test and they say, check this box or that box if, they can do this independently, or they need support with this,
right.
Or rank, from 1 to 4, the person's abilities. And we think that's really clunky. How do you know what someone's support needs and eating are if you're ranking them from 1 to 4? And so we do a very intensive time together, that's very self-directed and person-centered about, we'll come to your home actually, with the individual if you're within a certain radius of us, and we'll cook a meal there, because cooking a meal in a setting you're familiar with is very different than cooking a meal somewhere you're not familiar with.
Right.
And then we'll come cook a meal at one of the co-home locations, and then we'll go out in the community together. We'll have social activities together, and we'll get to really learn what someone's support needs are in that hands-on way. And then we'll go back and we'll look at the NJ CAT, which is the assessment tool used in New Jersey, to determine one's budget for supports. And we'll see, do these add up? Is this budget going to enable this person to be safe in their community? And we'll help the family advocate for the budget that they need.
That's really interesting. So how did you come up with that, where you go to the home and cook a meal with them and all that? Then you just sort of figured it out on your own?
In necessity, right? This whole thing is born out of necessity, where we've had folks join us, and we thought we had a good understanding of what their support needs were. Their parents thought they had a good understanding of what their support needs were, and no one realized that, well, if mom has been doing laundry for the person, for how many years, is that person able to do laundry on their own, and can the parent actually make an accurate assessment of someone's independence level with a certain task? So, for example, in doing laundry, if somebody, if it says, can someone do laundry independently, if that's a question, right, theoretically, and a parent says, sure, of course, does the parent say, hey, John, it's time to do laundry, or when was the last time you did laundry, or did you put detergent in, did you, if it's whites, did you add bleach, did you put it on the correct setting, did you empty the lint filter? There's like a lot of nuance in every task that actually takes some experience with the person to understand, divorced from their natural supports, which is pretty tricky.
Right. And it's funny because I'm thinking the opposite, where I thought that my son was not capable of doing things. And then when he went into the group home, he was doing things that I didn't think he could do. Right.
Yeah.
Because they put higher demands on him, than I did, so it could go either way, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So if I felt that I wanted my child to live in a place like this, what's the first steps? What do they have to do?
Great question. So if they were to reach out to us, our website is www.cohome.org, and they can reach out there. Our email as well as helpdesk@cohome.org. And so, you get in touch. We have an initial conversation, we have an application, we have a meeting, and we get started. So, if it's appropriate to begin with one of these experiential assessments, we also have a social club that folks can join, where they get to become kind of like part of the family without being a resident, where we go out into the community. We're doing a New York City trip in March, and these are all inclusive activities. So it's, people with and without disabilities hang out together, small group sizes, very, it's just a lot of fun. We've gone rock climbing, we've gone to the Liberty Science Center, we've got roller skating, we'll do some adventures. So that's a softer way to get started, because our goal as well is to transition with folks. We ask parents not to reach out to us for an emergency placement. We can't do that. We don't have the infrastructure for that. Our goal in the process is for folks to reach out to us way before they need housing. And the goal for those individuals who are able is to have an individual themselves, a prospective resident themselves, say to their parents, if they're able to self-advocate like this, I want to go live at Cohome.
Right.
That's when we're ready to go.
Yeah, I think that's huge, because when my son went into the group home, they just expected him to just pack up and move in, boom, with no transition at all. And it was horrible. He had a seizure within 24 hours and ended up in the behavior hospital, and I packed him up and I brought him home, and I said, this isn't going to work. So then we changed things, and we took 6 weeks of them. They would come to the house, pick him up, take him out for ice cream, and bring him home. Then the next time maybe they would take him to the mall or whatever. And they kept doing things to get him comfortable with who they are and get to know them, then maybe bring him to the house for dinner and then to come back, and then do one overnight and then come back, and we had to do this gradual transition until when it got to the point where he would come home and he'd start looking out the window. Are they coming for me yet? And I knew he wanted to go. That's when I knew he was ready.
That's great. That's so important. That's awesome that you had the foresight to, to back up from, that initial.
Yeah, but they didn't understand that at all. And I don't understand how they could not understand when you're dealing with people with special needs.
Right. Well, just looking at my own life, and I'm sure you have a similar experience, where, I had sleepovers in middle school and high school. I went to sleepaway camp. I then went off to college, and we have all these gradual phases of moving out, where we're able to self-advocate and learn that, okay, it's safe for me to leave my parents' home, and I'm still supported, I'm still loved. And if you just, have been living at home your whole life, you haven't had those transitory experiences, you just get dropped off one day. That would be quite a shock.
Yeah, and I'm going to tell you from the parents' point of view, what I experienced also was it was horrendous for me for him to move into that place. It was heartbroken. My heart just broke. I just bawled my eyes out because it was too sharp of a transition for me, because I was used to every minute of every day was wrapped around his care. From the second he got up in the morning, I got up. I came downstairs. I would help him in the bathroom. I'd give him his shower, every minute of every day. And then all of a sudden, whoosh, for the house to be quiet was horrible. And I've heard other parents talk about the same thing. And when I thought about it, I said, wait a minute, with my other children, it's gradual. You start with preschool, 2.5 hours, 3 days a week, right? Then you go to kindergarten, half a day. Then you go to first grade, full days. Then as they get older, right, then they have activities after school, or then they get their license. Then they go to college. You're gradually getting used to them being away for longer periods of time. And I went from taking care of a baby to boom, he's a man and he moved out. Like, it just didn't work. So I want parents to hear this as well. I think that's brilliant. And I think that's the way to do it, to do activities, like you said, and get to the point where they say, hey, I like this so much, I want to live there.
Right. And look, a lot of this came from just modeling stuff my mom did, right, with Jeremy, understanding that, she took the lead to help him have some of those extracurricular activities. There's actually a camp called Camp Pals where Jeremy's done some overnight camps with, which has been awesome.
Mhm.
And he actually did a travel trip by himself with a group. So kind of following her example
Mhm.
with all of our other folks, because we have found that folks reach out to us, they really want housing, and it's great. We all get so excited, but it's being advocated for by the parents,
Right.
and we need to see that reciprocated by the person who's actually making the move,
Sure.
and then understanding that the parent also, just like just like you said, needs a lot of support through that transition.
Yeah.
It's very different kind of phase of life.
Yeah. And I think that whole transition helps the parents as well. It helps the kind of the whole family be comfortable with this whole thing. So I had two other questions before I forget. So to be in a group home, you have to register with DDD, and everything is all done through the state. It sounds like this is a different model, right? This is all done just the parents contacting you. I didn't hear you mention that you have to call DDD first and go through them.
Right, so you can go directly to us, but we are a blended program. So folks who do want to use their DDD budgets to help them have the supportive services they need, we'll give them kind of a task list of things to do with the state so that they can utilize those supports in this setting. So it's not like a totally private setting. It's a blended between private and public, we could say.
Okay, so they could do either one? Is it up to the parents
Yeah.
or?
Yeah, exactly. So it's not, we're not a licensed group home provider, but you are able to bring in your supports into our setting and utilize those same state funds to do that. Also housing vouchers and the rest. So we worked very hard to make sure that the model complied to help the program be more affordable to families, compared to some of the other, fully private settings folks can live in. It could be prohibitively expensive.
Yeah, and that's what I want to know as far as paying for all of this. So what is the family responsible for? They pay rent for them to live in the home, and then they pay for their own support, whatever. And then how do groceries and all that, meals and all that, how does that work?
Yeah, so shared household items, co-home provides, because it's just easier. We don't want people bickering over who got the paper towels last or cleaning supplies. Food is all self-directed. Individuals independently or with their support staff go shopping for groceries. There's kind of a capital stack for how the fees come together. Right, there's a base rent. Folks can apply their housing vouchers to cover that cost. There's also a separate programming fee that covers the stuff they do with co-home. In terms of our our social club that I had mentioned, and like an experiential assessment if someone chooses to do that. And then there's the whole support side of it, right? So that's on like the residential and programming side, and then on the support side, folks, I believe everyone, with maybe the exception of one individual right now, does utilize their benefits to pay for their supportive services, and some may choose to chip in extra privately for additional supports separate from those Medicaid supports.
Okay, and then meals, they all do their own cooking? Do they ever do they get together for dinner or?
All the time. Yeah, so, but not necessarily as everyone together, right? So we do a facilitated shared meal, family style meal once per week. Where we all come together. We have a resident of the week. We have a cookbook. It's really fun. And then let's see, actually, I think it's like on the 22nd of this month. They're doing one of the parents is coming in who's facilitating a meal with like an island style kind of theme, sharing some of the foods, I guess, passed through the generations of his family. And then, but then, regularly there'll be a resident or two or three housemates will, if they line up in the kitchen, maybe they'll make something together. Maybe they'll have their own thing, together in the kitchen with supports, without supports, depending on what their abilities are.
And then tell me about the people that live in the home that do not have special needs. Who are these people?
These are, I mean, really just people, great people who've, you know, we've screened, gone through an orientation process with, brought into the family, and they believe in inclusion and they want to be housemates with people who are different from them, and they respect difference, and they're not support staff, right? That's like a really important distinction. They're peers. So they have the same responsibilities towards their housemates as housemates might have to each other. So right, they're all collectively housemates. So it's really tricky sometimes to understand what their role is,
Right.
because their role is really just, they're just like everybody else. So yeah, that can be a little bit hard for some individuals to get used to, who have come from programs where the only individuals who are neurotypical that they're interacting with
Is staff.
are staff.
Right.
And that can also be hard for parents to understand, you know, well, what is that role? And, you know, what are boundaries then? Because that's something that makes it different, right? So someone who is not paid to be with you has a very different relationship with you than someone paid to be with you. And that makes all the difference.
Right. And do you have males and females all together in the same house, or it's all males, or what?
Yeah, co-ed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about, since I have listeners all over the country, right? If they're looking to do something like this, where would they start?
Yeah, so, you know, I would encourage them to reach out. We're actually starting this year a program to work with folks, you know, groups around the country, to help them create co-homes by them. You know, we don't want to become like, we don't believe in a model like, you know, one size fits all, but there's a way to bring inclusive co-living to people who experience disability all over. So we're kind of packaged our experiences and are now offering to help people do this by them. You know, acquiring properties, determining if properties are suitable, you know, creating that kind of that vertical integration to help them bring in supportive services to assist residents who live there, outreach to, you know, get people who, you know, develop relationships with local universities and other organizations to bring that inclusive element into the homes. Yeah, so we're really excited to help Co-Home grow beyond Morristown. We've had people reach out from all over, and it's really exciting, the energy that folks are bringing to this idea that, right, and I think this ties into something we touched on before, right, the IDEA Act. So right now we're at this place where the IDEA Act was passed, what, like 40 years ago? So individuals are graduating from education programs where they were mainstreamed with the expectation perhaps of continuing to live and participate in a mainstream-like environment. And parents who are seeing that the only options in housing for them are segregated settings are keeping them home, are not signing up even for the housing wait list. And a lot of them are taking these initiatives to, or taking the initiative to create, you know, family-driven housing. So we're excited to work with them to help create more inclusive settings like that.
Yeah. So I had talked about this with Michelle. My son was number 4,555 on the priority list with DDD. She said that number's up to about 8,000 now. And that's the priority list. And beyond that, you have to get onto the emergency list before you can get into group homes. And she has no openings. I have another, there's a special needs attorney that I had interviewed, and her son is in a group home down in South Jersey, and it's closing because they don't have enough staff. And there's about 3 group homes down there that are closing and going out of business. So instead of creating more homes, we're losing homes. So this is a real problem. So I see what you're doing as part of the solution of what to do, you know, and I keep telling parents, you can't wait around for other people to do things for you. You have to do it yourself.
Sadly, yeah, that is definitely the case. You know, during COVID, I've seen a number of providers close up homes. You know, look, paying support staff $14 an hour just doesn't cut it.
Yeah. So who are the supports for people in your home? It's a separate outside organization, isn't it? That they hire to.
Correct. So, right, they can do a number of options. In New Jersey, it's a little unique. In different states, it's different. But in New Jersey, you can have self-directed employees who are billed straight from your budget that you actually, in a way, become the staffing agency of. So if Jeremy, my brother, were to self-direct some supports, which he does 2 individuals, it's almost like he and my mother create what would be, for lack of a better term, like the Jeremy Diskint staffing agency.
Mhm.
And they can hire and employ and individuals that they find and get registered through the fiscal intermediary in New Jersey to provide supports directly to him. You can also use agency-based supports who will bring in direct support providers. Right, you have a lot of choice as to who the providers are individually. And then the agency is in charge of those individuals, if there are any benefits or whatever that the person gets, and scheduling them collaboratively with the individual. So in co-home,
Can you help with that? If somebody has no idea where to start with that, but they wanted their child to live, their young adult to live in co-home, could you help them find support?
Yeah, exactly. So we'll do a lot of hand holding, through that process, speak with their support coordinators as to what the options are. We ourselves won't provide direct supports. We think that's a really important distinction between us and, maybe the more typical group home provider, to keep those transactions at arm's length so that the services are and remain person-centered.
Right. I would have much preferred that, to have direct contact with whoever was in charge of Robbie. I always kept asking, can't you just have one person to just always be with him that knows him, because he couldn't speak, so it was really important for somebody to become close to him and know him and understand him. I like that whole model much better. Now, how do you, I think you had mentioned it briefly, but you partnered with a foundation or something. Like, where does the money come from to even buy a home to begin with?
Yeah, right. Okay, there's the big question. There's the
Yeah.
$1 million question. We were very lucky when we began. We got a very sizable grant to start right at that flagship home that you've been to, and that's what kickstarted this. So after we.
But do you have a foundation? Like, because I ran into this problem to get donations. People always want to know, well, what's the name of your foundation? Like, how did you get that grant?
So yeah, we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. Right. So we are tax exempt and eligible for funding through these different foundations and programs. So that was really important. If we weren't that, I don't know how we would have begun, unless we were, a private setting that was charging, $9,000 a month, which some do.
Right. Which is the only other option that I knew of. Is there's a big facility in Warren, but it's $100,000 a year, for them to live in a small apartment. I'm like, how many people have that kind of money? You have to live plus spend $100,000 a year, plus spend money on your support people or whoever. I'm like, it's astronomical.
Right. And those settings, for that place in particular that you're speaking of, and others like it, are not inclusive. So for that amount of money, you're not even getting the least restrictive housing environment that they could be living in, which to me is ridiculous.
Yeah, what really stands out to me about you is you're very big on the least restrictive environment and making sure that they're part of the community and, and not segregated off somewhere. I remember when I first met you, you mentioned that several times. Yeah,
I think it's critical. So disability appears, and you're going to go off of my
Go ahead.
my stats a little bit. So right, disability appears in the population at the rate of 1 in 6. That's a lot. If someone were to ask me before I started that, co-home, how frequently does disability appear in the population? I don't know. Maybe I would have said 1 in 50, 1 in 100. I don't know what I would have said, but I know that I have a sibling with a disability, but I didn't know many others. And what that says to me is that they're not here. When I go to the coffee shop, and I actually, in town now, particularly because of co-home, I'll often see 1 or 2 of our residents around, or others with disabilities, but they're also the non-visible disabilities too. So it can be hard to see or be aware of. Creating the least restriction environment is what allows them to continue to participate in their communities. Just anecdotally, right? This isn't representative of everybody who lives in Coahome, and I wouldn't guarantee to everyone that they'd have these same results. But for my brother, he lives in Coahome. He walks to work at a restaurant in town, where he's a sous chef. He often will pop by the coffee shop with me in the morning to grab a coffee or some kind of latte on the way to work. He comes home, he has some programs online, he has some programs in person, and then he also just published his first book last week, which is available on Amazon. So for him to be able to have such an independent lifestyle is amazing. I mean, look, in large part, it's testament to the work my mother's done. I wouldn't have been able to create Coahome if I was Jeremy's primary caregiver. That's my mom. That's the important role that she's taken on, right? And that's how important parents are. Like what you've done for your son, right? That was a lot of time and energy, caretaking, being his champion. So, it gets to the other siblings listening. I think siblings have a real role to play in creating more inclusive opportunities for their siblings to have the same opportunities that they have.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Well, I think what you've done is amazing. And I think your mom sounds like an amazing mother. She should get her on and interview her too, because she sounds amazing. But I want to thank you for being here and sharing all of this information with us today. And can you just at the end, just give us your contact information one more time if anybody needs to reach out to you?
Yeah, great. Our website is www.coahome.org. You can also reach out to us at helpdesk@coahome.org, COHOME.org.
Wonderful. Okay. Hey, Nate, thank you so much for being with us. I really appreciate it.
Cindy, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
That's it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed listening and it helped you gain a new perspective. To see the video version of the show, go to our YouTube channel, Robbie and Me, Autism Reality. If you're interested in buying our book series, Robbie's World and His Spectrum of Adventures, the link will be in our episode description, as well as my Instagram and Facebook pages. If you enjoyed the show and you'd like more content, please be sure to hit that like button, follow us, and don't forget to leave us a great review. Thank you for joining us. Be sure to join us again on our next episode of Spectrum Perspectives.
Thank you for joining us today. Be sure to join us again on our next episode of Spectrum Perspectives.